Hello everyone, welcome to the complete GS-II revision marathon for UPSC Mains 2026. Today, we are not simply going to revise GS-II, we are going to understand it. And I believe there is a very big difference between the two. Most students begin their revision by opening the Constitution. Some begin with Lakshmikant, some begin with current affairs, some begin with governance. Some even start solving previous year questions. But before doing any of that, I want to ask you one simple question. What exactly GS-II? What exactly is GS-II? Think about it. Think about it for a moment. If I ask this question to 100 UPSC aspirants, what answer do you think I will receive? Most students will immediately say, Sir, GS-II means polity. Some will say constitution and governance. Others will add international relations. Technically, all of them are correct, but I don't think any of them answer the real question because none of them explains what UPSC is actually trying to evaluate through this paper in the examination in the GS mains. And unless we understand that, our preparation remains incomplete. Today, before we revise a single article, before we discuss parliament, before we discuss governance, before we discuss international relations, I want to change the way you think about GS-II paper. Because once you are thinking changes, revision becomes much easier. Now imagine something. Imagine that today is your first day as a district collector. You receive a call early in the morning. You receive a call early in the morning. A major flood has affected several villages. A major flood has affected several villages. The state government has issued emergency directions. The National Disaster Management Authority is monitoring the situation. That is NDMA. The High Court has sought a status report regarding rehabilitation. Local panchayats are demanding greater financial powers. Several NGOs have entered the affected areas to provide relief. Citizens are filing RTA applications asking how relief funds are being spent. The media is questioning the transparency of the administration. At the same time, the central government has announced a new rehabilitation package. And because the affected river is an interstate river, you must coordinate it with another state government. Why? Because that is interstate river. So now think carefully, which subject prepared you to handle this situation? Was it only polity? Was it only governance? Was it only international relations? No, certainly not. Every single decision you take depends upon understanding how the Indian state functions. That is GS-II, not polity, not governance, not current affairs. GS-II is the study of the Indian state, its designs, its institutions, its functioning, and its accountability and its relationship with the society and its interaction with the world. The day you understand this, the entire paper becomes connected. Until then, it looks like disconnected chapters. I want to tell you something that I have realized after analyzing every GS-II paper from 2013 to 2025. UPSC is not testing whether you remember information or not. They don't bother. Information is available everywhere. Books have information, Google has information, artificial intelligence has information, then everywhere information. But UPSC is testing something much deeper. It wants to know something very deeper. It wants to know, can you think constitutionally? Can you analyze institutions? Can you evaluate governance? Can you balance competing interests? Can you solve public problems? Can you think like an administrator? That is the real examination. And throughout today's marathon, that is exactly what we are going to learn. Not merely what the constitution says, but why it matters. Not merely what parliament does, but why parliament exists. Not merely what governance means, but why governance succeeds or fails. Not merely what India's foreign policy is, but how international developments influence administration inside India. This marathon has only one objective. What is that? By the end of today, you should never again feel that GS-II is a vast collection of unrelated topics. By the end of today, what you are going to learn, you should never again feel that GS-II is a vast collection of unrelated topics. Instead of that, you should see one complete system. You should see one complete system, one connected framework, one living institution, that is the Indian state. And once that picture becomes clear, everything else begins to make sense. So let us begin, not with articles, not with amendments, and not with current affairs. Let us begin by understanding what GS-II is really trying to teach us. And one more thing I want to ask you, that is, why did UPSC create GS-II? Just think about it, take a moment. Why did UPSC create GS-II? Let me help you in this context. Now that we know what GS-II is. Let us ask a much deeper question. Why did UPSC create this paper in the first place? Think about it carefully. I'm asking again. UPSC could have simply asked polity. It could have asked constitution. It could have it could have asked governance. It could have asked international relations. Instead, it deliberately combined all these areas into one paper. Why? Think about it carefully. Because UPSC is not interested in teaching subjects here. UPSC is interested in evaluating. UPSC is interested in evaluating administrators. There is a very big difference. An administrator does not work inside one subject. An administrator works inside one system. Let me explain what I mean. An administrator does not work inside one subject. An administrator works inside one system. Let me explain what I mean it. Imagine tomorrow morning you become the district collector of your district. Let's say for example. When you enter your office, do you think your table will have separate files labeled constitution, governance, social justice, international relations with the labelings? No, never. Life never comes organized according to the syllabus. Real administration never says this is a constitutional problem. This is a constitution problem. This is only a governance problem. This is only a social justice problem. Real administration never say. Reality mixes everything together. Suppose there is a dispute regarding land acquisition. Dispute regarding land acquisition. Suppose what I am trying to say. Suppose there is a dispute regarding land acquisition. Immediately, constitutional rights become relevant. The executive has to implement the law. The judiciary may intervene. Local bodies become stakeholders. Civil society organizations raise objections. Political representatives demand changes. Media begins questioning transparency. Citizens start filing RTI by applications. Within a single issue, you are already dealing with almost the entire GS syllabus. That is administration. That is why GS-II exists here. Let me tell you something that many students never realize. UPSC is not preparing you for the examination. UPSC is preparing you for the job after the examination. There is a difference between those two. The examination is only a filter. The service is the destination. The moment you become an IAS officer, Your everyday decisions will require constitutional understanding, not because someone asks article numbers, but because every administrative decision must remain constitutional. Every welfare scheme must remain lawful. Every public policy must remain accountable. Every executive action which taken by you must remain reasonable. And every public authority must remain transparent. Every decision must balance efficiency with justice. Efficiency with justice. Every decision must balance efficiency with justice. Comes to the development with environmental concerns, security with liberty, majority will with constitutional morality. That is the balancing ability. That balancing ability, efficiency balanced against justice, development balanced against environment, security balanced against liberty, majority will balanced against constitutional morality. Every decision balances competing constitutional goods. That balancing ability is what GS-II actually testing. That balancing ability, not memory, it, it is what GS-II actually tests. Now let us go one level deeper. What is a constitution? Many students think the constitution is a book. No, the constitution is a philosophy. What is parliament? Many students think parliament is a building. No, not at all. Parliament is an institution that converts public will into law. Then what is governance? Governance is not a chapter. Governance is the ability of the state to translate law into public outcomes. Governance is the ability of the state to translate law into the public outcomes. What is social justice? It is not merely welfare. More than that, it is the constitutional promise that development must include every citizen. Then what is international relations? It is not simply diplomacy. It is how India protects its national interests while remaining committed to international law and cooperation. Both are needed. National interests to protect while remaining committed to international law and cooperation. Now look carefully, everything connects. Nothing stands alone here. Everything connects. This is exactly how UPSC designs GS-II paper as far as mains is concerned. UPSC CSE. There is another misunderstanding that I want to remove today. What is that? Many students think GS-II is a memory paper. I completely disagree with that. Let me ask you, can an administrator solve governance problems simply by memorizing articles? Memorizing articles? Of course not. Can an administrator improve education by remembering committee names? No, not at all. Can an administrator resolve a constitutional crisis by writing definitions? Again, no. Administration requires judgment, analysis, balance, decision making, institutional understanding, problem solving. That is why, if you observe GS-II questions carefully, UPSC rarely asks, what is this? What is this? Rarely asks, what is this? Instead, it asks, analyze. It asks, evaluate. It asks, examine. It asks, discuss. It asks, critically analyze. Notice the difference between what is this and these: analyze, evaluate, examine, discuss, critically analyze. Notice the difference. UPSC already assumes that you know the basics. The real test begins after knowledge. This is why two students with exactly the same information often score very different marks. UPSC already assumes you know the basics. That is why two students with exactly the same information often score very different marks. One student writes information, the other student demonstrates understanding. UPSC rewards the second student, that is who demonstrates understanding, because governance is not about processing information. Governance is about applying knowledge to solve public problems. That is the mindset I want you to develop throughout this marathon. So let me summarize this discussion. GS-II was not created to test your memory. Then what? Then why? It was created to test your administrative thinking. It wants to know, can you understand situations? Can you evaluate governance? Can you identify constitutional values? Can you analyze public policies? Can you suggest practical reforms? Can you think like someone who will one day govern this country? If your answer is yes, then you are preparing for GS-II in the correct way. If your preparation is only about remembering facts, you are preparing for yesterday's examination, not tomorrow's. So before we open the official syllabus, please remember one sentence. What is that? That is, GS-II is not the study of government. It is study of how constitutional democracy functions, evolves, and solves public problems. Everything we learn today will revolve around that single idea. Now, let us decode the official syllabus itself. Because I want to show you that those 18 bullet points which were given in the syllabus are not 18 separate topics. They are actually one beautifully connected governance architecture. Let us begin with that. Before we open the official syllabus, I want to show you one picture. I want to show you one picture. In my opinion, this picture is far more important than memorizing hundreds of articles. Because once this picture becomes clear, the entire GS-II syllabus logical. So imagine that India is not merely a country. Imagine India as one giant living system like the human body. Every living body has different organs. Each organ performs different functions. Yet every organ works together. Even though if even one organ stops functioning, the entire body suffers. Exactly the same principle applies to the Indian state. The Indian state is not one institution, it is a living constitutional system. It is a living constitutional system. Every institution has different responsibility, but every institution must work together. Now let us build that system. At the center of everything stands the constitution. At the center of everything stands the constitution. The constitution is not merely a legal document. It is the blueprint. It is the blueprint of the Indian state. Every institution, every law, every policy, every office, every authority ultimately derives its legitimacy from the constitution. If the constitution is blueprint, then parliament becomes the law-making institution. Parliament becomes the law-making institution. Whenever society changes, parliament translates those needs into legislations. It converts public aspirations into legal authority. But laws alone cannot solve problems because someone has to implement them. Someone has to implement them. That responsibility belongs to executive. Implementation responsibility belongs to executive. The executive converts laws into action, like schools, hospitals, roads, digital governance, tax administration, disaster management, etc. Everything you experience as governance is largely the work of the executive. The executive. Now imagine the executive exceeds its authority. Who protects the constitution? If the executive exceeds its authority, who protects the constitution? That is judiciary. The judiciary. The judiciary ensures that every institution remains within constitutional limits. The judiciary ensures what? That every institution remains within constitutional limits. It protects fundamental rights. It resolves disputes. It interprets the constitution. It ensures that constitutional supremacy remains alive. Constitutional supremacy. Constitutional supremacy remains alive. It ensures that. But governance is much larger than these three institutions. Why? Why? Modern democracies require specialized institutions like election commission, COG. COG means controller and auditor general, then finance commission, UPSC, National Human Rights Commission, information commissions, regulatory authorities, These institutions improve accountability. They strengthen democracy. They ensure that power is exercised responsibly. So now let us move one step further. What is that? Why does the state exist? Why does the state exist? Ultimately for citizens. There is no doubt. Not for institutions, not for governments, not for bureaucracies. Every institution exists to improve the lives of people. That is where social justice enters GS2 with education, health, nutrition, women, children, senior citizens, persons with disabilities, marginalized communities, unemployment, and poverty. All these areas remind us of one constitutional promise. What is that? That is, development must reach everyone, not only a privileged few. That is why welfare becomes part of governance. Finally, India does not exist in isolation. Every country today is connected with trade, technology, climate change, security, migration, energy, supply chains, artificial intelligence, and global health. So every major domestic decision today has an international dimension. That is why international relations completes GS2. The Indian state must protect its constitutional values internally while simultaneously protecting India's interests globally. Both duties. The Indian state must protect its constitutional values internally while simultaneously protecting India's interests globally. Both. Now let me draw the entire picture. The Indian institution, parliament, judiciary, execute, constitutional bodies, statutory regulatory bodies, governance, social justice, citizens, and international relations completed. Now look at this diagram carefully. This is GS2, not 18 chapters, not hundreds of articles, not thousands of pages of current affairs. This is single framework. Every question UPSC has asked from 2013 to 2025 fits somewhere inside this diagram. Every current affair you studied this year belongs to somewhere inside this diagram. Every answer you will write in mains will emerge from this framework. If you understand this framework, revision becomes organization. If you don't, revision becomes memorization. And memorization has limits. Understanding does not. That is the difference between memorization and understanding. Most revision classes begin with chapter 1 of a textbook. We begin with the architecture of the Indian state. Because once the architecture is clear, every topic naturally finds its place. Now, we are finally ready to open the official UPSC syllabus. But this time we will not read it out. We will decode it. We will decode it. because I want to show you something very interesting. The official syllabus appears to have 18 different bullet points. But after analyzing every GS-II question from 2013 to 2025, I realized something. What? What? What is that? Those 18 bullet points actually collapse into a much smaller number of governance domains. And once you understand those domains, the entire GS2 paper becomes surprisingly manageable. So let us decode the official syllabus. Let us decode official syllabus. We have now understood something very important till now. That is, GS2 is the study of the Indian state. We have understood why UPSC introduced this paper. We have understood how the Indian state functions till now. Now let us ask perhaps the most important question of today's marathon. That is what? How does UPSC actually creates a GS2 question paper? How does UPSC actually create a GS2 question paper? Think about this for a moment. Every year, thousands of students try to predict UPSC. For that, some rely on current affairs, some revise thick books, some solve previous year questions, some collect hundreds of PDFs. But almost nobody asks, how does the examiner think? How does the examiner think? And unless you understand the examiner, you can never completely understand the examination. And unless you understand the examiner, you can never completely understand the examination. That is, you have to know at this point of time. So today, let us sit on the other side of the table. Imagine you are a member of the UPSC paper setting committee. Let's say tomorrow morning you have to prepare the GS2 paper. Then think, how would you do it? Would you open today's newspaper and pick the biggest headline? No, no, not at all. Would you randomly select 10 articles from the Constitution? Again, you said no. Would you simply repeat last year's questions? Certainly not. Then what exactly happens? The process begins with one document, not the newspaper, not coaching material, and not current affairs magazine. That is the official UPSC syllabus. That is official UPSC syllabus. That syllabus is the constitutional boundary of the paper. Nothing can be asked completely outside it. Everything begins there. Everything begins there. Now imagine the syllabus as a map. Within that map, there are a few permanent regions. The constitution, federalism, parliament, judiciary, governance, social justice, and international relations. The constitution, the constitution, federalism, parliament, judiciary, governance, social justice, and international relations. These regions remain almost permanent. They do not change every year, but something else changes continuously. Reality, society changes, technology changes, economics changes, politics changes, the international system changes, and governance challenges change. So now the examiner asks one question: how do these new developments test the old constitutional principles? What examiner asks: how do these new developments test the old constitutional principles? That that is where questions are born. Let us understand this through one example. Let's take federalism. Federalism itself has not changed. It has existed since the constitution came into force. But every year new situation emerge, like a dispute regarding the governor, a debate over fiscal devolution, a disagreement in the GST council, an interstate an interstate river dispute, local government reforms, one nation one election, different events but same constitutional principle. UPSC is, so you have to understand here very carefully one thing. UPSC is not asking about news. UPSC is asking what does the event teach us about Indian federalism. That is the difference. So UPSC is not asking about news. UPSC is asking what does this event teach us about the Indian federalism. That is the difference. Now take governance. Governance remains the same, but governance problems evolve. Yesterday the challenge was corruption. Today it may be artificial intelligence. Yesterday it was manual administration. Today it is digital governance. Tomorrow it may be algorithmic decision making. Technology changes, governance principles remain. UPSC therefore asks, can you apply governance principles to a new realities? UPSC asks therefore, can you apply governance principles to new realities? Not. Did you read today's newspaper? The same applies to international relations. India's national interest remains constant, but the global environment never remains. Wars begin, governments change, trade routes evolve, climate negotiations expand, new alliances emerge, old alliances weaken. So UPSC is not asking what happened yesterday. UPSC is asking what happened yesterday, not asking. It is asking how should India respond. That is strategic thinking. Now let me tell you something that completely changed my own understanding of GS-II paper from 2013 to 2025. I expected to find hundreds of unrelated topics. Instead, I discovered something fascinating. The paper changes every year. the wording changes, the examples changes, the case studies changes, the current affairs also changes. But the underlying governance structure hardly changes. So what you have to understand with this? So UPSC keeps returning the same constitutional questions, the same institutional questions, and the same governance questions, and the same social justice questions, and the same international relation questions. The same international relation questions. Only the context changes. That is why students who study only current affairs struggle. And students who study only static books also struggle. Why? One has context without foundations, and other has foundations without context. But UPSC demands both. Think of a tree, the constitution, institutions, and the governance principles. Let me tell you, thinking of a tree, you have to think of a tree. The constitution, institutions, and the governance principles are the roots. Current affairs are the branches and the leaves. Every season, the leaves change. Some fall, some grow, some become green, and some become dry. But the roots remain exactly the same. If you study only the leaves, your understanding becomes temporary. If you study only the roots, your answers become outdated. But a good administrator understands both. That is exactly what UPSC expects. Now let me explain how we are going to study throughout today's marathon. Study throughout today's marathon. Every single topic, without exception, will follow one structured process. First, we will understand the official syllabus, and second, we will analyze UPSC asked questions from that area over the last 13 years. Third, we will connect those patterns with recent governance developments. Fourth, we will definitely identify the constitutional and administrative principles involved, and we will discuss how such issues should be analyzed in the examination. And sixth one, we will convert that understanding into a high scoring answer. What we are going to do is, I'm telling you, I'm repeating again. Now let me explain how we are going to study throughout today's marathon. Every single topic, without exception, will follow one structured process. We will understand the official syllabus. Then we will analyze how UPSC asked questions from that area over the last 13 years, from 2013 to 2025. Then we will connect those patterns with recent governance developments. Then we will identify the constitutional and administrative principles involved. Then we will discuss how such issues should be analyzed in that examination. and we will convert that understanding into a high scoring answer. For that, you have to do one thing. Notice something first of all. We are not studying five different sources here. We are studying one integrated system. That is the philosophy of Metis. We are not going to here tell you regarding not fragmented preparation, integrated preparation here, not collecting information, building understanding, not memorizing events, developing judgment. That is the philosophy of Metis. So before we open the official syllabus, I want you to remember one sentence, that is UPSC does not create questions from newspapers. Again, I am telling you. It creates questions from the syllabus through the lens of contemporary governance. If you remember only this one idea from today's marathon, what is that? UPSC does not create questions from newspapers. It creates questions from the syllabus through the lens of contemporary governance. So your preparation will immediately become more focused, because from this point onwards, every current affair you read, you will automatically ask yourself, which part of the syllabus does this belong to? Which part of the syllabus does this belong to? The day you start asking that question, you stop preparing like an aspirant and you start thinking like a future civil servant. Now let us finally open the official GS-II syllabus, not to read, not to memorize it, but to decode the architecture hidden with. Let's begin. This is where students usually become bored in every marathon, because teachers simply read the UPSC syllabus. We won't do that. We will decode the syllabus. I know many of you have probably seen the syllabus hundreds of times. Some of you have even memorized every bullet point. But today I want you to look at differently, not as a student, but as an examiner. But there is a fundamental mistake almost every aspirant makes. They think the syllabus is a list of topics. The syllabus is a not list. It is a blueprint. Every single line, every single phrase, every single word has been carefully chosen. Nothing is random, nothing is unnecessary. And if you understand why those words are there, your preparation changes completely. Let us look at the first few lines. The Constitution, historical underpinnings, evolution, features, amendments, significant provisions, basic structure. The Constitution, historical underpinnings, evolution, features, amendments, significant provisions, basic structure. At first glance, this looks like six different topics, but it is not actually. UPSC is asking only one question. Did you understand the constitutional identity of the Indian state? Notice what UPSC did not write. It did not write, read every article. It did not say memorize constitutional provisions. Instead of that, it used words like historical underpinnings, evolution, features, basic structure. Why? Because UPSC wants understanding, not memorization. Now we move to the next bullet. Functions and responsibilities of the union and the states. Federal structure, devolution, local governments. Again, many students treat these as different chapters, but they're actually asking one larger question. How is power distributed in India? Think about it. Who makes laws? Who implements them? Who collects taxes? Who spends money? Who is responsible during disasters? Who manages education? And who controls policing? Every one of these questions is ultimately about the distribution of powers. That is federalism. Constitutional underpinnings, historical underpinnings, and then federalism. Now look at the another bullet, that is separation of powers, dispute redressal, institutions. Again, UPSC is asking only one thing. How is power controlled? Why? Because democracy is not only about giving power, it is equally about limiting power. Why? Power must always remain accountable. That is why parliament exists. That is why the judiciary exists. That is why judicial review exists. That is why independent institutions exist. Now move further. Parliament, state legislatures, executive, judiciary, constitutional bodies, statutory bodies, regulatory bodies, quasi judicial bodies. Many students panic here. So many institutions, so many bodies, so many functions. But I want you think and I want you look at them differently. These are not separate chapters. These are the institution through which the constitution governs India. The constitution provides the vision. Institutions implement the vision. That is why UPSC studies institutions. Not because they are important for prelims, but because administrators work with institutions every single day. Then comes governance, government policies, development, NGOs, SHGs, transparency, accountability, e-governance, citizen charter, civil services, etc. Ask yourself one question. Why has UPSC grouped all these topics together? Why? Because they all answer one question. What? What is that? Can the state actually deliver? Having a constitution is one thing. Implementing constitutional promises is another thing. Governance is the bridge between constitutional ideas and citizens' everyday lives. So now we reach social justice, health, education, human resources, poverty, hunger, welfare schemes, vulnerable sections. Again, UPSC is asking something much larger. Not what is this scheme, but has development reached every citizen? That is social justice. Development is not measured only by GDP, gross domestic product. It is measured by inclusion, that is inclusive growth, opportunity, accessibility, dignity, justice. That is why this entire section exists. Finally comes to international relations, neighborhood, global groupings, international institutions, diaspora. developed countries, developing countries. Again, UPSC is not asking you to memorize foreign policy events. Then why? It is asking how does India protect its national interests in an interconnected world. The world changes, governments changes, wars happen, technologies change, trade routes evolve, climate negotiations continue, but India must constantly respond. That response is what GS2 studies. Now let me show you something that completely transformed my own understanding of this syllabus. When I first looked at these 18 bullet points, I thought they represented 18 different chapters. After analyzing the syllabus, along with every GS2 question from 2013 to 2025, I realized something remarkable. These 18 bullet points are actually manifestations of just a few core governance domains. In other words, the syllabus looks much larger than it actually is. Because many bullet points are simply different expressions of the same constitutional idea. So, throughout today's marathon, we are not going to revise 18 disconnected topics. Instead of that, we are going to organize the entire GS2 syllabus into a small number of integrated governance domains. Once that organization becomes clear, revisions become faster. Retention becomes easier. Answer writing becomes more structured. And most importantly, you stop feeling overwhelmed. Remember this, the UPSC syllabus is not trying to confuse you. It is trying to guide you. The problem is not the syllabus. The problem is how we usually read it. Today we are going to read it the way UPSC intended. And that changes everything. Now let us take the next step. If the syllabus is the blueprint, then the obvious question is this: how has UPSC actually used this blueprint over the last 13 years? Have all these areas been equally important, or have some themes appeared repeatedly? Which governance domains does UPSC return to again and again? Which governance domains does UPSC return to again and again? To answer those questions, we now move to one of the most important parts of today's marathon, that is the structural intelligence of GS2 through previous year questions from 2013 to 2025. Let us begin the evolution of GS2 from 2013 to 2025. This is not about the question discussion. This is UPSC pattern intelligence. Now we understand the official syllabus, but let me ask you another question. Is reading the syllabus enough? Obviously not. Because a syllabus tells us what UPSC can ask. It does not tells us what UPSC actually asks. This There is a huge difference in that. A syllabus tells us what UPSC can ask. It does not tells us what UPSC actually asks. There is a huge difference. If I simply give you the syllabus today, can you predict the paper? No, not at all. Because the syllabus is only the possibility. The question paper is the reality. And between possibilities and realities lies 13 years of UPSC thinking. That is exactly what we are going to study now. I want you to imagine something. Suppose UPSC never released previous year questions. Suppose every year the question paper disappeared forever. Would preparation become easier? No, it would become almost impossible. Why? Because previous year questions are not merely questions, they are the language through which UPSC communicates with aspirants. Every question tells us something, not only about the topic, but about the examiner's thinking. Every question answers 3 points. Every question answers three important questions. Those are: what is important? How should it be asked? How deeply should it be analyzed? That is why I always tell students, never solve previous year questions only for practice. Study them to understand UPSC. When I analyzed every GS-II paper from 2013 to 2025, I was not searching for repeated questions. I was searching for repeated thinking. There is a difference between those two. Many students count questions. I tried to understand patterns. Many students memorize topics. I tried to identify question families. Many students ask, will this question repeat? But I asked, what kind of thinking keeps repeating? The single shift completely changed my understanding of GS-II. Initially, I expected to find complete unpredictability. After all, everyone says UPSC is unpredictable. But after analyzing 13 years, I reached a different conclusion. What is that? UPSC is unpredictable only at the surface. At its core, it is remarkably consistent. Let me repeat that. UPSC is unpredictable at the level of wording. It is predictable at the level of governance philosophy. The examples changes, the context changes, current affairs change, but the constitutional questions remain. The institutional questions remain. The governance questions remain. The social justice questions remain. And the international questions remain. That is why analyzing PYQs is so powerful. Now let me show you what I discover. Now let me show you what I discovered. Instead of seeing hundreds of unrelated questions, I found recurring governance domains. Every year, UPSC returned to these domains, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, sometimes through the current affairs, sometimes through constitutional debates. But it always came back. These recurring domains became the backbone of GS-II. And once I recognized them, the paper stopped looking random. Now I want to show you something very interesting. Look carefully at this timeline. First and foremost, that is 2013 to 2025. At first glance, every year looks different. Different governments, different current affairs, different international events, different judgments, different policies, but underneath, the same governance architecture continues. That is the first lesson. Now let us divide these 13 years into phases. Into phases. Not political phases, academic phases. Because UPSC evolves, it does not remain static. It does not remain static. So, in three phases, we are taking first phase from 2013 to 2016. This was largely the phase of constitutional foundations. This was constitutional foundations. Institutional design, basic governance, federal questions, parliament, judiciary, constitutional bodies, etc. UPSC was establishing the grammar of GS-II in this foundation phase from 2013 to 2016. It wanted students to understand the structure of the Indian state. Then phase 2, that is 2017 to 2020. Something changed here from phase 1. Questions became more analytical, implementation became important, governance became important, technology entered administration, transparency became important, more important, accountability became more important. Instead of asking what is the institution, UPSC increasingly asked how effectively is the institution functioning. From what is the institution to how effectively is the institution functioning. That is the shift from structure to performance, from foundations to performance. Then comes to phase number 3, that is 2021 to 2025. This is also called as contemporary response. This is another transformation. From now, governance became deeply interconnected with current realities. Digital governance, data protection, technology, artificial intelligence, global supply chains, strategic competition, climate diplomacy, electoral reforms, institutional accountability. These things are asked in this phase. UPSC was no longer asking only how is the state designed. It was asking, can the state respond to contemporary challenges? This is where today's preparation must focus, because this is the contemporary response phase. Now let me tell you the biggest discovery from 13 years. UPSC never abandoned governance, never abandoned constitution, never abandoned governance, never abandoned parliament, federalism, it never abandoned. It simply kept asking them through that new context. That means if your conceptual foundation is weak, current affairs alone cannot save you. And if you study only static books, you cannot answer contemporary questions. You need both intact. That is exactly the philosophy of today's marathon. Throughout this marathon, every topic will therefore be studied in 4 dimensions. First, what does the syllabus say? Second, how has UPSC asked it between 2013 and 2025? And third, what has changed in recent current affairs? And fourth, how should you answer it to mains 2026? This is a complete preparation cycle, not reading and understanding. Not understanding. not reading, understanding, not understanding, execution. Now we are finally ready to enter the actual knowledge domains. And we begin with most important foundations of the Indian state, the constitution. Because every institution, every law, every policy, every governance reform ultimately derives its legitimacy from the Constitution of India. Let us begin with the constitutional foundations of GS-II. Those are historical underpinnings, evolution of the Constitution, features of the Indian Constitution, amendments, basic structure. Let us begin with these constitution foundations of GS-II. Thank you.